that you know that amazing things. You know that amazing things are soon to come. I want to go ahead real quickly and allow the stage for one of our amazing community leaders, Senator Malcolm Augustine. Senator Malcolm Augustine, will you please share some brief thoughts on what you think about happening today?
Gabriel, thank you so much for that. And I just say welcome to everyone. I am State Senator Malcolm Augustine, and I proudly represent the 47th District within Prince George's County, the home of the Prince George's County African American Museum and Cultural Center. I am a member of the PGC AAMC, and I encourage all to become members too. At the end of this, and then you can definitely go to the website. You can also find out information which will be shared, those who are participating in the follow-up survey. And I do encourage you to become members. Today, I am very excited to bring greetings and join the celebration by participating in this collaboration between PGC AAMC and the Prince George's County Lynching Memorial Project to learn more about our history. Thank you so much to all for joining us, and I pass it back to Gabriel.
Thank you so much for what you shared just now. I also want to give a quick announcement to everyone. The museum is looking to open up, the physical museum itself to open up during Black History Month in February 2022, possibly sooner, so please stay tuned for notifications. Until then, we want you all to know that we are going to be doing continual virtual programs to educate the masses about Prince George's Black history, art, and culture. Also, we are in the midst of a pre-development building of our new building expansion. So please stay tuned for further details and continue to be excited with us as we show how amazing Prince George's County is. Now, with that being said, I want to also give some brief shout outs to our board members for the Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center. I also want to give thanks for people on our staff, such as Marifel Bermudez, who is our marketing and gallery coordinator. And with that being said, I want to go ahead and hand the floor to one of the committee members for the memorial project that will be speaking today. His name is Omar Eaton Martinez. Omar Eaton Martinez is an amazing figure. He has worked in the county for several years. Before I go any further, Omar, do you have any thoughts that you would like to share before I continue? I just want to get your thoughts real quickly.
I'm so excited to be here, excited to share this stage with my good friend Shamika Berry and my new good friend Senator Malcolm Augustine, and of course the wonderful Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center. So I'm just excited to dig in. So I don't have anything further to say.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, guys, I hope you guys are ready to really have an amazing time today, because it's going to be powerful. And just to give you some more information about who Omar is. Omar Eaton Martinez leads the Prince George's County Historical Resources, which includes historical house museums, the Aviation Museum, the Black History Program, and archaeological parks. He oversees the programming of those sites with an emphasis on preserving, sustaining, and enhancing these resources as well, and engaging and building communities through education, innovation, and outreach. He has also recently worked with the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, the National Park Service, the Office of the National Museum of the American Latino Commission, NASA, and he was also a K-12 teacher in New York City schools and in DC. He has a leading role in racial equity organizations like Museum and Race, Transformation and Justice, Museum Hue. He's also done work extensively in regards to diversity and inclusion in museums and cultural institutions. I also heard he did an amazing program on his side with the amazing KRS-One, which I would encourage everyone to please check out. Phenomenal history. But with that said, Omar is going to do an amazing presentation on the Prince George's County Lynching Memorial Project. And I'm going to turn the floor over to him to share why you should be aware of the work that's happening here today when it comes to Thomas Juricks and remembrance of those who are victims of racial terrorism. Omar, please take the floor.
Thank you, Gabriel. Marisol, if you want, you can go ahead and share the first slide. I want to open up this conversation with a breathing exercise. And why do I want to do that? Because breathing is essential to life. And what we're talking about is the humanity in African people and all the people that really are residents here in Prince George's County. But it's important to remember to breathe, especially with all the things that we've gone through lately. So this exercise, I call it a 4-3-5. And so what you're going to do is you're going to inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 3, and exhale for 5. So one more time, inhale for 4, hold it for 3, exhale for 5. So we're going to start now. Now, from the moment of capture, starting 500 years ago, over half a millennia, our breath has been compromised. You can imagine how it feels when somebody startles you from behind. Well, imagine being kidnapped from your native land. From the long march where our ancestors were chained on our necks, our wrists and our ankles chained to each other to march from different parts as far in as Central Africa to near the west coast of Africa and other parts as the slave trade continued to grow. You lose your breath when you go through something like that. From the point when you get to the slave dungeons, when you're packed in like sardines and you have all the stenches that you can imagine, your breath is compromised. Your breath is compromised when you went on the slave ship and you had to endure the Atlantic Ocean, and you had to endure the inhumane treatment by slave traders, and of course, the packing in on the boat. And of course, once you become an indentured servant and go into race-based slavery, the inhumanity continues and our breath continues to be marginalized. Well, we go on to Reconstruction, and November 1st, 1864, the state of Maryland decided to emancipate, and only 5 years later do we have the first recorded racial terror lynching, the first recorded, I say specifically, and that is Thomas Juricks, who we'll talk about in a moment. But we know what racial terror lynchings mean is that there's a rope tied around your neck, and then you are choked, the life is choked out of you. So for the whole time we've had to deal with our breath being taken away from us. So I think it's important for us to really honor and be grateful for the ability to breathe right now. The Prince George's County had the highest population of African descendants in Maryland at the end of the Civil War, primarily because it held the most slaves in captive during that time. There certainly were a lot of free blacks as well. And it also had the second highest amount of lynchings in the state, second to Anne Arundel County, which is right next door. And we know that, unfortunately, over the years, even recently, the county has had a varied relationship with the police and how it's treated unarmed people of color. And those are things that we're still working through the community. But I share all that because it's all connected, right? We can focus on lynching, which is important because a lot of stories there are untold, especially in our county. But it's important also to understand that it's connected historically, that there is a continuum here, which means that it could continue to go on or continue to even get worse, which we all should be alarmed and up in arms about. And so that's why I wanted to put it and connect the dots for us in that way. If we can go to slide number 2. Again, the idea of the Prince George's County Lynching Memorial Project is really to educate the public on the truths of our nation, continuing the legacy of slavery, to memorialize victims of racial terror lynchings in our county and advance the cause of racial justice and reconciliation through mutual support and collaboration. These are the goals that we've had. I started joining the meetings back, I believe it was in April of 2019. We were meeting in the northern county with a lot of concerned citizens who really wanted to do more around the awareness. We were all motivated by the great work of Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative and the money he was able to procure to really help people establish historical markers and do soil collection ceremonies to honor and memorialize these murders and to bring this awareness to the forefront of our country's memory. And then later on, I was appointed by our current governor, Larry Hogan, as a commissioner for the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I stayed active, and I'm still active with the Prince George's County Lynching Memorial Project. And what I do is I serve now as a liaison between the two organizations. And we have many different organizations fighting the good fight in this state. We should all acknowledge that, because I think we are way ahead of a lot of other states in telling these stories. We have so many different state commissions and state nonprofits and county coalitions, and even certain counties have their own specific lynching and truth reconciliation commissions. And so there's a lot going on in the Maryland state, and Prince George's County is certainly one who is paying attention to this and trying to continue to bring awareness to the masses of what happened in this county and surrounding areas. And so we're working together in the spirit of collaboration. And one of the things that we're trying to support each other is definitely in the memorialization of men like Thomas Juricks through soil collections and historical markers, and continued programming around the legacies of enslavement, the legacies of racial terror lynchings, but also in thinking about what the task is for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is to lead public hearings in the counties where we have documented lynchings. And so working with the Prince George's County Lynching Memorial Project, we're going to put together public hearings as early as January of next year if all things go well. And so we definitely want people to be involved with that, and then we'll share about how we can be involved with that more specifically in a few moments. If you can go to slide number 3. So right now, these are the 4 men that we have documented who were lynched during this time. Thomas Juricks, who we just spoke about, in Piscataway, Southern County; John Henry Scott in Oxon Hill in 1875; Michael Green and Stephen Williams, both in Upper Marlboro, Maryland in 1878 and 1894. And so what our plan is to continue to work with these communities so that we can memorialize these murders, bring awareness and education about what happened, so that we can continue to understand better and do better as a community. And then we'll have the opportunity to really have the truth out there, so true justice and reconciliation can actually occur. I also wanted to acknowledge the fact that a lot of these lynchings, or all these lynchings, happened in what we call Southern County, or sort of like the central to Southern County. And one of the people I used to work with, who is no longer with us, used to talk to me about the idea of the Mason-Dixon line not really being between Pennsylvania and Montgomery County, but really being the middle of Prince George's County. How different it was once you got from Central South to Southern County, and how the politics change and all these things. So I think it's not a coincidence, unfortunately, that these men were all lynched in Central and Southern County in Prince George's. And so, again, we're working with EJI to follow their guidelines, to do a soil collection ceremony, historical markers, and all those things that we want to continue to do. But what I want to do right now is just get proximate with who Thomas Juricks is, because he's not just some name that we're putting on the slide. Like, this was a human being that lived on this earth and that had his life wrongfully taken from him. And so I want to share a few things about Thomas Juricks. So Thomas Juricks was a laborer in Prince George's County of Maryland in 1869. He was living on Thomas Adams' property and worked as a laborer for the nearby Shoaft farm to support his wife and 6 children. 6 children. Juricks' family had recently moved from Buckystown near Frederick to the Washington, D.C. area. While working on the Shoaft farm, he injured his hand while using a scythe. There were no bandages available, so he tore a piece off the leg of his trousers and fashioned a makeshift wrap for his wound. 3 days later, this innocuous event proved to be Thomas Juricks' condemnation. Miss Dooley, a well-known Prince George's County teacher from Fort Washington, was on her way to teach class on the morning of October 12th. Dooley allegedly arrived to a bend in the road after receiving a ride from the docks by buggy from a young, unidentified male acquaintance of hers. Electing to travel the rest of the way on foot, she was at some point assaulted and was beaten unconscious. Her initial screams alerted a pair of nearby hunters and a fellow teacher, Mr. Eckert. They transported the incapacitated Dooley to the neighboring Renault household and then organized a posse of roughly 50 men to hunt down the assailant. The posse, made up of local residents, first apprehended an African-American man named James Jackson, Soon after, they captured Thomas Juricks, who was transporting goods further down the road on an ox-drawn cart. Juricks was chained up to Jackson, despite the only evidence pointing towards either man being that they were in the area at the time of the attack. Both men were taken to Justice Brooke in Piscataway District, but without a witness or any evidence condemning them, Brooke decided to hold the two men in custody overnight in the hope that Dooley would recover enough to be able to identify her attacker. Around midnight, a group of men attempted to lynch both Juricks and Jackson, but the guards convinced the mob to disperse and allow Brooke to find evidence to identify the perpetrator. The following morning, Dooley had still not recovered, and doctors were unsure if she would survive. It was at this time that the members of the community claimed to have discovered a piece of fabric near the scene of this assault that matched Juricks' makeshift bandage from his scythe injury a few days prior. This was all that was needed to condemn Juricks, and the decision was made to transport him to Marlborough, Maryland. Juricks was placed under the protection to Constables John Underwood and Anthony Anderson. As they set out for Marlborough, Juricks requested they pass by the house where his family lived so he could bid his wife farewell. When the wagon came to a stop at the Juricks household, the group was approached by around 20 men clad only in shirts and underwear, with the exception of one man who only wore a shirt. The entire mob donned handkerchiefs over their faces with eye holes cut out before setting to besiege the wagon. Constable Underwood attempted to thwart the attack by firing several gunshots, but he was subdued, tied, and left on the side of the road. Anderson was forced to drive the wagon out into the woods before he was subsequently tied and left at the wood's edge. Pushing further into the forest, the mob stopped at an oak tree with a waiting noose. Juricks was forced into the noose and made to stand atop the wagon. When the wagon was moved, Juricks jumped and caused the rope to slip from its higher perch. His feet were now able to touch the ground, saving him for a brief moment before one of the lynch mob jumped on Juricks' shoulders while the rest of the mob swung his body back and forth to strangle him. Following this, the mob arranged themselves in a firing line and shot a volley of bullets into Juricks' body. Thomas Juricks was left to swing from the tree for 2 hours before a coroner's jury was sent to cut him down and simultaneously declare him dead from hanging by unknown persons. His body was moved a short distance to Hatton's Hill, near a public road leading from Broad Creek to Piscataway, where he was buried to serve as a warning to nearby communities. A grand jury was called to investigate the lynching, and despite condemnation from the local judges, no one was brought to trial for Juricks' murder, and the Evening Star went as far as to declare the circumstance of this case justified as full as any could the action of the community. So these are the stories. This is one of our stories. The other ones are just as heart-wrenching. And if we think about the collective of African Americans, Native Americans, Latinx folks who've been lynched all throughout this country, all of these are heart-wrenching stories. And this is why it's important to do this work and for you to join us. If you could show the contact us slide, Marisol, I just want to make sure that people understand how they can reach us. And we have our pgclmp.org, which is our website. And we're really hoping to get people from the Piscataway communities, the Oxon Hill communities, the Upper Marlboro communities to join us with this effort. And no matter where you reside, honestly, if you're willing to join us and to lock arms with us to make sure that these stories are told, this education is given to our communities so the truth can be told, so we actually do have half of a chance to actually have justice and be reconciled with one another, so we can really have the humane society that we rhetorically say we have already. It will be wonderful for you all to join us. We have also, we have a Facebook page, we have Instagram, and I believe we have also a Twitter. And there you go, thank you. And so that's how you can contact us. I know that we also were able to get started on some of our remembrance projects with Thomas Juricks. We've had 2 tours happening in January and August. So I believe that Gabriel Greaves, who was actually a part of those tours, is going to talk us through some of these pictures now so you can get an idea of what we've been up to. And we plan to do more in the future, hopefully something around October, honoring the anniversary commemorating the death of Thomas Juricks. So please look out for that. But without further ado, I want to pass it back to Gabriel so he can talk to us about his experiences going on those tours for Thomas Juricks and Piscataway.
Appreciate that. Thank you again for taking the time to break that history down. If we can go to the first picture for us. One of the things I want to make clear for everyone in the audience and the viewing audience is that it's really important to not just hear about history from a distance. I think it's really important for us to immerse ourselves in the history that is right around us. Prince George's County has some of the richest history, the richest African-American history and Afro-Native history, to be more specific, in the world. And so it's really powerful with these remembrance projects, if you are able to get involved with them. One of the pictures that you should see coming up here happened about 3 weeks ago, I believe, 4 weeks ago. And we basically went to all the sites that were associated with the life of Thomas Juricks. Now, one of the things that I didn't know about as an educator and a researcher was that Thomas Juricks was also heavily involved with historical movements such as the Freedmen Bureau Project, the Freedmen Bureau schools, actually. He was a really, really powerful figure when it comes to education. As it turns out, because African Americans were getting involved in historical spaces with education and advancement, his life was a threat. And at one point, if that picture can come up real quick, Marifel, at one point, when we took a tour, we went to Chapel Hill to see what happened in that space when Thomas Juricks had passed. As it turns out, Thomas Juricks' death caused several of the Freedmen schools to shut down for an entire year. Now, during COVID-19 and the Delta variant on the rise as well, you can only use, many of us have experienced the trauma of schools being shut down and students being able to keep up with their work. Can you imagine what that would be like for African Americans during this era, where they couldn't go to school because a well-known figure in the community was murdered, and he was murdered because education was a threat? Do you know what the message would be for those African American kids? When you see that and you actually go to these spaces, it makes you appreciate how far we've advanced with education, Black studies, and further. So again, I was thankful to be a part of this experience, seeing different pictures that they showed us. One of these pictures, if you can show that real quickly, is a map of the actual areas associated with Thomas Juricks, his passing, his lynching, and the other sites where accurate issues occurred. That picture should come up in the next couple of seconds. That would be appreciated. But being there in these spaces was really powerful because I didn't realize how extensive this history was in the southern part of Maryland. And one of the things that they mentioned was that you don't have to be a scholar in order to be present in these spaces. You don't have to be a scholar at all to be present here. So coming out of that, I realized that this work of remembrance of community projects, of remembrance of victims of racial terrorism, is something that everyone can do if they invest the time, if they take the time to go to these spaces themselves and see. While the pictures are also going to be going further, Omar, I have a couple of questions for you, actually 2 questions, if I may ask. Are you good with that?
Yes.
Okay, stellar. So the first question I want to ask is this. Why do you think that people in communities may be resistant to getting involved with this kind of work when it comes to remembering Thomas Juricks and the other victims of racial terrorism? Why do you think people today in our communities are not as quick to want to get involved? Because I have seen pushback in some spaces in the public school sector, for example. I've seen, unfortunately as it is, people say, well, that's history, that's in the past, that's focusing on things that we should forget as we focus on all the achievements we've made today. So I'm curious, why do you think there's resistance today in getting involved?
Well, I think that that is something that is not unique to this story. It is not unique to Prince George's County. I think it is have become part of the DNA of being an American, is that we don't want to be uncomfortable. We have grown up to be socialized and with sort of this ethnocentric view of who we are in the world, and that this is the very best of the very best, and which gives a false narrative of flawlessness. And we have many flaws, and so do other countries, right? But we don't want to lean into that so that we could be better. We want to lean into exceptionalist narratives that make us feel real good, or at least some of us, about who we are in this country. And I don't think Maryland has created any particular barrier to prevent that from happening in this state, nor do I think this county has either. So that's why I think the work is important for us. And I think a lot of the things that we do in our work in PG Park's history is trying to find new ways to create brave spaces where people can lean in on that discomfort, because if we do not, it will not change. And I don't want to have this conversation in 25 years with my kids again when they're adults. Like, I hate for them to have that. I don't expect everything to completely be solved in 25 years, but I don't want them to have the exact same conversation. But they will if we don't lean in. And so I think it's really important to be as honest as possible, to be respectful to everybody's positionality. I mean, there's some people that, this makes people extremely uncomfortable. So do you want to pour all this over their head? Maybe not. I mean, there's different ways to engage. There's different ways to engage, and we have to differentiate and create a nuanced menu of interpretation, programs, and exhibitions when we do this type of work. But it won't happen if we don't collaborate with the community. That's why we are really sending out this call to action for people to really become involved with the Prince George's County Lynching Memorial Project, because it cannot happen without community involvement. It's not just going to happen with a select few or even a select few subject matter experts. Like, we need everyone to be in here, whichever way you stand, whatever way your comfortability is right now. And we're hoping that people can be brave enough to lean into that discomfort so that we can do better in the future.
I have another question to follow up for that before we go on to our next panelist. But the question I have is this: what do you think the significance is of remembering Thomas Juricks' death in light of the fact that his murder happened in Native territory, in Piscataway territory?
Well, it brings up so many questions, and I know that our group is really digging in and trying to do their best to find out about all these different types of connections. We certainly know the Piscataway Nation is the ancestral group here in this area, and we know also that there's been a lot of engagement in the early years of African descendant people with the Piscataway Conoy tribe. And so I think it's fair to speculate that there could be connections with the Piscataway Nation, being that it was in that area, but we're not really sure. I also know that there, throughout different parts of the country, there have been folks who identified as indigenous peoples, part of different nations across the United States, who were also lynched and involved with racial terror lynchings. And so what it makes me think about is, like, we don't have any documentation about that. All we have is maybe some speculation, but it'd be interesting to see if that occurred, right? And I think the one thing about racial terror lynchings is obviously it comes from this white supremacist construct. And we know that white supremacy is consistent, if anything. It's malleable, but it's consistent. And so I don't think it's unfair to speculate that could have happened. We just don't have any evidence right now to show those connections. And so we're just kind of continuing to dig in the archives and, again, cling to the community for people who do have information about this so that we can start to piece that together.
by the way, I wanted to mention it to everyone earlier. One person that was reached out for this particular discussion, he gave his blessing, though he's not able to be here. Chief Billy Tyak. He had mentioned, as he and I were able to talk, that these conversations are critical when it comes to how we move forward. We actually, as we talk, one thing that came up in the conversation was in regards to those who may identify as Afro-Native, those who have Piscataway background and African-American heritage. Just for some historical background, there were many who actually did have intermixed families. And so for them, when it comes to realizing that being Black was a threat in America, these stories merged together. I myself have Afro-Indigenous background, specific Kermanti, and also Gullah Geechee background, and also Blackfeet. But interestingly enough, when we talked about lynchings growing up in America, we always understood that being Black, whether you were Black and Native or Black and African American, you still have to understand that nuance of identity. And so I'm really thankful for all the community work that has been going on. The show, like one of the things we did, if you see the picture in front of you, we actually did time to do land acknowledgements. We didn't just acknowledge Thomas Juricks' passing, we acknowledged that we were standing on Piscataway land, and that there were many traumas that happened prior to Thomas Juricks that are a part of the continuing narrative of America being in denial of herself. And part of us going forward is addressing American exceptionalism for the myth that is. There are many great things that America has done, but there are many ugly things that have been done since the very beginning of our nation's history. And it was powerful being there with others who are acknowledging the original people of the land and the continuing trauma that came from Thomas Juricks' passing in several other spaces. So again, thank you so much for what you shared with that. I am now going to segue, with that being said, into our other panelist, because she has some amazing things that she's going to add. Shamika Berry. Let me give you some information about Shamika Berry for those of you who may not be familiar with the works. Shamika Berry is the outreach specialist at Accokeek Foundation. She's a former Air Force officer turned actress and makeup artist. She has portrayed Kate Sharper at the National Colonial Farm for several years. Shamika also believes in bringing history to life to make it more relatable to the audience. Furthermore, she's presented first-person historical interpretations at local schools for over 15 years for Black History Month and other special events. She was a featured actor in The Choice about enslaved people of Sauterley Plantation in St. Mary's County during the War of 1812. And so, Shamika, I want to hand the floor over to you and ask you to continue on what we're talking about when it comes to why these conversations matter. Would you mind sharing, please?
Thank you, Gabriel. And thank you, Omar, for your wonderful interpretation and explanation of what has happened in history in Prince George's County and how Prince George's County is remembering and honoring those victims of racial terrorism. And thank you, Senator Augustine, for being here and for your wonderful words of encouragement at the beginning. As Gabriel said, I am the outreach specialist at the Accokeek Foundation. The Accokeek Foundation stewards the sacred homeland of the Piscataway people, who are very active within the community and the foundation itself. And we are honored to work with them to continue to tell their stories of the people and of the land that we are happy to be doing our work upon. I am not Piscataway, but I do identify as Afro-Native. I am Creole by heritage. My family is from Louisiana. And though I am not Piscataway, I do understand that connection between having the African American heritage as well as the Native American heritage. The story of Thomas Juricks is deeply affecting to me because I know personally within my family that one of my great-grandfathers had physical assault placed upon him from the police in Louisiana. And there was a newspaper article about it. And within the article, they referenced my great-grandfather several times as the Negro, the Negro, the Negro. Well, that Negro had a name, and his name is Paul Demichet. And his father was white and his mother was half Black and half white. And that didn't matter because they saw him as one way. And within the Creole community and heritage, the communities banded together because the less white you were, the more in danger you were in. And having that knowledge of my heritage and what happened within my family, knowing what happened to Blacks and Native people in Louisiana, and knowing how that happened throughout the nation, is why telling these stories and sharing what has happened to them very important. The work that I have had the opportunity to do at the Akakeek Foundation brings attention to that. The picture that you see on your screen is of me portraying a woman named Kate Sharper, who was enslaved during the 18th century in Prince George's County. All we have is her name and that she had a son. Her son's name is debatable. It could have been Jack, it could have been John, but we know that she did have a son. But that is all we know of her. We have the probate records that shows her existence, that she lived and she breathed, but her story has been lost to history. But during our research and other slave narratives that we have found, we know the stories of many enslaved people whose families were separated through being sold away, through other trauma, through lynchings, through murders. And so we take those stories and we have combined it with the name of Kate Sharper. And then I put on the clothing of an 18th century enslaved woman to bring her story to life, to humanize her story so that she is more than just a name that you see in a book, which you will not find because she represents the everyday enslaved woman. You're not going to find her on Wikipedia or in the encyclopedia. And if you Google Kate Sharper with a C, you are likely to see my photo. But her name is important because she had a name and it shows that she existed. And so I find it an honor and a great responsibility to tell her story along with other stories of historical figures that I have had the honor to portray. I started portraying historical figures because I didn't know how my children would be taught Black history in their schools. I was taught very little growing up, and I went to many schools. And the same historical figures I was told about over and over. But there were so many people who made so many contributions. And as Gabriel was asking Omar earlier about why are people hesitant about talking about these stories and hearing about these experiences, because Omar was saying, and I agree, we like to be comfortable. Society has ingrained in us that being a slave or being enslaved is bad, and that anything dealing with master is good. You want to get a master's degree. There are military ranks within all of the branches that may have the term master somewhere in the enlisted structure. When you purchase a home, they want to show you the master suite. But the masters were the ones who were enslaving people. They were the ones who were purchasing people. Being enslaved does not make our ancestors bad people. They have families, they had names, they had hopes and dreams, and they deserve to be remembered. People have walked away from me while I was dressed in 18th century garb at the Akakeek Foundation because they don't want to hear those stories. But it is important to say their names and to talk about, yes, even the ugly parts of our history, because those threads are what have been woven together to create the fabric of our nation. And if we don't know where we've come from, then we're not going to know where we have been, to know how to do better, to teach our children and their children how to do better, how to remember our ancestors, how to move forward so that we can make a better future for the future generations. The stories that we tell at the Akakeek Foundation about African Americans, about the Piscataway people, is just one page in a larger book. The stories that are told throughout the rest of PG, the stories that are told at Mount Vernon, the stories that are told at the Smithsonian are all pages that make up an entire book of this region's history. And I encourage you all, if you are local, to go to these different sites to hear about these different facets of history, the good parts, the difficult parts. If you're not local, look us up, check out our websites. I know the Akakeek Foundation has worked very hard to bring a lot of these stories to life in person and also virtually. So you can find them on our Akakeek Foundation page on our YouTube channel. And you can find Sisters Forever and the reunion of Kate and Jack, and even some of the portrayals that I've given of Kate Sharper. It's important to talk about these stories and our ancestors and what they went through. We are their legacy. And those of us who are the descendants of those ancestors are here because our ancestors survived. There are so many families that were lost during the Middle Passage that can't find their link back to their families in Africa or the Caribbean or other countries that our ancestors hailed from. We are their legacy. We need to tell their stories. We need to share the history. All of our visitors of our different museums and different educational institutions are our visitors together. I'm very grateful that my children, who you see before you on the screen, have worked with me to tell these stories, to bring these stories to life. They are the next generation. And if I don't teach my children, then I'm doing them a disservice. And they won't know how amazing it is that we had an African American president, that we have an African American and Asian American vice president. That was their norm when they were growing up, President Barack Obama. But them knowing their history allows them and affords them the opportunity to see how phenomenal it is, the strides that the country has made. And are we perfect? No. Have we finally achieved where we need to be? No. It is a growing process, but we have to learn and we have to teach and we have to open up our hearts, because if we don't acknowledge the past, we can't heal from it. And yes, there will be scars that are left, but scars are a sign of healing.
I was going to move on quickly from that point in regards to asking the audience to share some thoughts, but I really think it'd be important at this point for everyone just to pause just for 10 seconds and take in what was just said. So I'm going to inhale myself and exhale. And I really hope that you hear what Shamika Berry just laid out so wonderfully. It is really critical. And just to be clear, we've had many people who have come to the museum and other museum partners who have shared some of those stories that Shamika just shared about. The reality of being a triracial being, all Black, proud of every facet of Blackness, every facet of Blackness in America. There have been people who have had to process that experience of anti-Blackness in the country. At the same time, they've had to fight for 2-3 different identities that may not be understood in more than 1 or 2 spaces. And that trauma can be a lot on someone's soul. And so I'm so thankful that she shared about the importance of understanding that reality and understanding how we should share our stories. So I have a question for you, Shamika. Would you mind me asking you a question real quickly?
I don't mind at all.
All right, stellar. So I have a question for you. How has your Creole heritage from Louisiana impacted you in recent months when it comes to working with people of the Piscataway Nation? And also, what does Creole mean? Because some out there may hear the word but not understand what that means. I know, having family from Louisiana, we were told there's a difference between Creole and Cajun. So let's just put that out there before anything else. What does Creole mean, please?
Creole means to have the heritage of European, often French and or Spanish, Native American, and African American, African descent. Cajuns, as of most recent years, the delineation is that they do not have the African part of their heritage. So they are European, they will have the native, but they don't have the African portion. So that is the difference between Creole and Cajun. So thank you for asking that for clarification. How my heritage has helped in the work that I do with the Akakeek Foundation is that there were times when I was concerned about doing a first person interpretation of a Piscataway Afro woman. And I deliberately chose not to take that route and focus more on Kate Sharper, who we know was African American or African descent, because I didn't want to be disingenuous. Yes, there is Native in my heritage, but I am not Piscataway. And speaking with some Piscataway members of the community who I've learned to be able to call dear friends of mine now, one in particular encouraged me by saying, well, you are Afro-Indigenous, and so you have the right to tell those stories. And she appreciated that I did not want to be disingenuous and did not want to wear garb that was not of my heritage and portray a Piscataway woman. But she said that telling the stories of the Piscataway was not inappropriate coming from me because of the connection that I have of similar background and similar heritage. And I greatly appreciated that. The opportunities that I've had at the Akakeek Foundation to recently create the series, Hear Us, See Us, We Are More Than One Month, has been eye-opening and has allowed for great conversations with many partners like the Sauterley Plantation and Mount Vernon. Those you can also find on our YouTube channel. And it gave us the opportunity to really break down how these conversations affect first-person interpreters, the conversations that we need to have with our visitors and throughout the community. And these conversations, along with some of the blogs that we have, August and September, will be focusing on the heritage, Piscataway heritage, and then African American heritage, and how to share those stories with the community and to get the community to understand the importance of sharing those stories and the importance of talking to the elders to continue on understanding the heritage better. And those will lead into a conversation that we are looking to have in October, which will be about cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. As we head into October and the fall months, there has been the debate, especially within this region, of sports mascots and people embracing other cultures for mascots and costuming under the guise of appreciation, but it's appropriation and it's inappropriate. And so we are going to have those conversations coming this fall about honoring and respecting your fellow man and knowing when to appreciate someone's culture and not try to take it as your own, as a trend or because it's popular or because it serves a purpose to root for your favorite sports entity, whichever your favorite sport is. So I'm just very grateful for the support of the Akakeek Foundation to have these conversations with the community and with our visitors. And though COVID has really, really changed the face of our world, it allowed us to explore this virtual world. Now I know that we have people on this webinar from all corners of the United States. And I'm grateful for that because now our message can get out to more people than just Prince George's and St. Mary's and Charles County, but that we have people in other states, in Georgia, Louisiana, perhaps Alaska, and even Maine, that are able to participate and take what they have learned from this webinar and share it with their families and their friends and their communities so that we can affect not just our county and our local community, but our nation as a whole.
I want to go ahead, before I forget, I want to make certain that we open it up for the other panelists because you said a mouthful with everything you stated. Senator Malcolm Augustine, would you mind sharing some thoughts, if you have any, on what you've thought so far with someone leading on your level? How does this conversation impact you, or what do you think about it?
Gabriel, thank you so very much. I was just very much touched by this conversation, and I just want to thank Omar, Prince George's County Lynching Memorial Project, and Shamika at the Akaki Foundation for sharing these stories. And I'm really struck by this story of Thomas Juricks and the Piscataway Afro-Indigenous people, and even just more broadly, the global African diaspora within the Americas, because we can really learn from this tragedy so that history does not repeat itself. That's a main takeaway from me. Persecution may look different in 2021, but the bottom line is that marginalized people, Afro people like us, must be vigilant and protect against the mob. We must protect against the mob. And we learn from these things, and history has taught us that. But Gabriel, there's good news. I think there's good news though, Gabriel. Think about these dire circumstances and just think of what was accomplished by our ancestors under these extreme circumstances. It's just amazing. It demonstrates a tremendous amount of strength and power that's within us. We cannot forget the past, nor should we allow it to repeat itself. But our future is bright. Our future is bright. It is absolutely bright. And so I just thank you all for being a part of this. And this is just really wonderful, and I'm really happy to be able to participate in it. Thank you. And then Gabriel.
I'm so sorry. You can hear me now. Whew. You brightened all of our days with what you just said. I wanted to make that point. We're going to have some quick questions coming through. If you have questions, please type them into the chat. But what was just said, I'm glad for that last note that you said, because we don't just want people to remember the trauma and the tragedies. There is also generational blessings in the ancestors that we come from, not just generational pain. And part of us remembering them is remembering the resilience that they had to train up people and to help us remember, no matter what happens, we know our roots. That's the primary reason we remember, because if we forget not just the trauma, but who they were, we allow the system to win. We allow white supremacy to win. And we, as Prince George's County proud, Black excellent people, we will not let people lose this fight. So I'm just so glad for this. Does anyone have any questions? Please put them in the chat in the last couple of about 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes that we have. Does anyone have any questions? Please. Don't be shy. I saw some comments earlier, by the way. I did want to say this comment because it was too good to forget. Someone said, here it is. Someone said, I realize this is an African-American lynching with Thomas Juricks, but I remember there is a space called Indian Head Highway that is called that because the heads of Native Americans, of Indians, were posted along that road to also incite fear and foreboding to other American Indian tribes. That is something, we weren't planning to share that little part on the program, but it needs to be said. There's something to be said about having an interdisciplinary perspective. When one group is going through trauma, what many forget is that other groups are going through trauma at the same time. When intermixtures happen, sometimes part of healing or coping was to keep quiet on the traumas themselves. I've had conversations with many elders that came out, elders before they passed, shared stories of what happened in their family line. And, we as descendants were like, wait, why is grandma just now telling us this? Why did grandfather just now tell us that he actually was a member of one of the local tribes, but chose to identify as African-American because it was less traumatic than being Native American? Why am I just now finding out that we had people that were African-American, but had to hide their identity because of code switching regarding being of mixed background? Shamika shared about Creole heritage, where there are many forms of creolization throughout the US, including in Prince George's County. people that came together and had to deal with others saying, you really can't be Black. We don't really identify you. We won't give you rights if you identify as Black. So you're mixed, you're mulatto, or if you could pass, you're white. Those things cause trauma for our elders, and many of them didn't share those details until near their passing. And this is why it's important to get people together where you are, to collect these stories, to gather the information. There's a saying that when an elder dies, an entire library passes. It hits me every time I think about that. When an elder dies, an entire library passes with them. So right now, what Shamika has done and what Omar has done, and what Senator Augustine has also brought into the picture, has been a call to action to get these stories so that we don't have missing information for 7 generations in the future. There's a concept for Native that says, don't just think about what's happening today or tomorrow, think 7 generations ahead. 7 generations ahead, how will your land be used for your descendants? 7 generations ahead, how will the stories you're telling now shape their identity in the future? And that's what we're doing. I see a question that came through here. If this recording going to be available for the public? Yes, this recording is going to be available for the public as soon, not immediately after this, but as soon as we do other things regarding editing, you shall have this recording available. You can also go to the Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center on our webpage to see firsthand many of the other virtual programs, of which this will also be a part. I see a comment in here. Shamika, do you want to speak on that as well, what you just shared?
Yes.
I see.
So I saw that there was a question about if I ever work with white reenactors. The Akakeek Foundation, in addition to me portraying Kate Sharper, we also have other historical interpreters who portray the family that owns her. It's a fictional family that is an amalgam of the different families whose records we have, and they're named after the congresswoman who purchased what we considered the colonial farm and then donated it back, so that we have the National Colonial Farm and they portray the Bolton family. So yes, we do tours and we do presentations where we interact with each other. And then I also have friends that are within the theater and the reenacting community, and we have plans to work together in the future to continue telling these stories, both that are difficult and the ones that are uplifting, to show that there were many different relationships within many cultures and communities that need to be told. So thank you for the question.
Stellar. And I also see a comment in here. Someone said, Soror Harriet, I believe, she said, what is really a shame for myself and my Tuskegee classmates is that we did not know decades later, something that we did not know decades later was that the trainer of all the Tuskegee Airmen was a man giving us change in the laundromat, Chief Anderson. Oh, wow, did not know that. It's amazing how much rich history is in all the points that everyone is raising. So again, thank you guys for sharing these stories. And please continue to do the work of encouraging one another. Once this presentation is over, the work continues. And you, as Grace Lee Boggs said, she said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. Change starts with us today, and we have everything we need of our ancestors for moving forward. So again, thank you everyone for sharing. Also, as mentioned before, there's going to be it's in the chat, there's going to be a survey as well, a post-program survey. It was mentioned earlier, but I just want to reiterate, please, there's going to be a post-program survey sent to all of our registered viewers. So once you get that, please fill that as soon as possible. The edited video will be there on our website once uploaded, and please go to www.pgaamcc.org to see more of our virtual programs and the work that we're doing. So on behalf of the Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center, on behalf of our panelists and all of you who joined with us today, thank you for helping to make our county a beautiful place. Thank you for helping us to truly show how Prince George's County is a space to be proud of, where we can have conversations that will change generations. We thank you for coming through today, and we hope you have an amazing day. God bless.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Woo.